invited here today by Alex and the Architecture Foundation to speak about two of our buildings that are in progress in Antwerp. First of all, my name is Gleeson. I'm an associate at David Chipperfield Architects, and I'm the project architect for these two buildings in Antwerp. Housing, workspace and a garden square is the title of this presentation. I'll start by speaking a little bit about Nieuw Zuid, which is the neighborhood that these buildings are in. Nieuw Zuid is a master plan that was made by Second Vegano master planners in collaboration with our client, a developer, and the city of Antwerp. And it's a very interesting neighborhood in that it sits right on the edge of the 19th century city. It's on the banks of the Scheldt River, and on its south side, it has a big traffic intersection and kind of motorway spaghetti junction. So it's bordered by some quite clear borders on each side and has some very interesting conditions. So our two buildings, we were invited to do a feasibility study for an office bar on the left and a residential U-shaped block on the right. They sit a bit after halfway through the master plan neighborhood. If you're to describe the master plan, what's the arrangement about? It's about a series of blocks that are separated by pedestrian streets every second street and vehicle streets every first, and a main spine that's connected back to the dry dock to the northeast. The second street in Antwerp is an important thing. It's always been the kind of a busy commercial street separated from the Scheldt and protected a little bit away from the quays. So it's an interesting place in Antwerp. And the idea was to connect the main street into this space. I think the other way that the master plan and the neighborhood is connected back to the city is by the river. You can see here some pictures that I took about a year and a half ago, maybe, where part of the master plan, the landscape, let's say, is starting to mature, and also about a third of the master plan is actually built. A third is in the process of being built, and a third is planned. Here you can see also that when we visited the site about a year and a half ago to 2 years ago, there were already buildings completed. And those buildings showed that these clients were interesting clients. They had an ambition architecturally, and they were inviting interesting architects to work on the site. Here on the left, you've a gallery building by office Gleeson and Severin, and then on the right you have a residential building by Robrecht and Dan. An important part of the master plan and what makes it successful, I think, is the landscape. This is a collage by the landscape architect Bas Smets, who developed further the Second Vegano master plan and put flesh on its bones in a way. Here you can see in dark that the park to the south, which protects the master plan protects the neighborhood from that spaghetti junction I spoke about. But then you can see that there's a whole series of textures and different kinds of planting that flow through the blocks and around the streets. Here's an example of one of those pedestrian routes with its ditch. Is not a nice word in English, but that's essentially what it is. It's a water ditch that's planted and invites you in between the blocks. Here's the main square of the master plan with that gallery I spoke about. It's a main square with a much more mineral quality and opens onto the main street. So that main square you can see there is the largest of the three public spaces on the main street. They, as I said, connect back up to the historic dry dock, and our residential building sits on the second of these spaces, which sort of sit like pieces or pearls on a necklace that link the person walking down the main street back up into the city. That's a picture of what the dry dock looked like a long time ago. It became a big parking lot in the 20th century, and is now becoming being redeveloped as the largest public space in Antwerp. So we came to the feasibility study looking at the master plan and saying, okay, there's a residential block here which has a quite an inward looking arrangement, and an office block. Well, we have the opportunity to work with these two buildings together, and is there a way that we can make something more of their partnership? And so we started to interrogate the blocks and look to see what was possible in terms of arrangement and scale. And we came to what for us was the most exciting solution, a kind of shared square that would become a garden, but that would be not just a garden for these buildings, but actually a public garden, so that we would release this garden from its residential U shape and make it something that these buildings use, but also the neighborhood uses. And that has then a connection, many connections to the park beyond, back to the main street, etc. So that's what's interesting about this. For us, we start to see two buildings with a very definite relationship to each other, but then also to all of the buildings that they're surrounded by. One of the interesting things about the master plan was this encouragement to create very generous external spaces for all apartments. So all apartments need to have a view. This is how the master plan describes it. And by creating this arrangement, which was no longer internally focused, but opening towards the public spaces on either side, our residential building, the one on the right, can be lined with these kinds of external spaces, winter garden spaces. And also our long office building has the suggestion of potential external space that we can start to develop and figure out in the context of an office program. If you zoom back out then and you look at the arrangement of these buildings, our ground floor plan, you can see that there's a really nice relationship between our green square and the main mineral square of the master plan. Scale-wise, they're quite similar, but they're very obviously, in terms of their qualities and their conditions, they're very different. And then with Bas Smets as our collaborators on the landscape, we're developing a kind of orchard that will sit in this garden space that you can move across and move through as you please. There won't be gates around this square, which is interesting. So this is looking back on that main street and the facade, the elevations of the main street. What's interesting for us is to say that because we've made the residential building more dense and tighter, it becomes taller and sort of announces and invites people to move along the main street back behind the building into the square. But it also answers in a way that this very successful building by Atelier Quintil on the main square, which has a very direct formal relationship with the square in front of it, and our building takes a similar approach in its directness with the step back public space of the main square. So all of these sort of decisions at an urban level start to create two buildings that they kind of rely on each other. They have similar approaches, they have similar spatial conditions, and they have a shared square. The other thing to think about in terms of context is we started this project, this feasibility study, weeks or maybe a month or two after David Chipperfield Architects signed the Architects Declare letter in late 2019. And so the question of the climate emergency was finally a real an important question on the table currently for us every day at the office. And us as a young team, we were interested in saying, well, we need to take the history of David Chipperfield Architects, and we need to embrace this question of sustainable design, especially when it comes to carbon, let's say. We can take all the ideas of sustainable design that have already been part of our practice and focus it even more on the pure questions of energy and carbon. How do we go about this? First of all, it was a shared approach across the two buildings. We think that advocacy is the most important thing. Sustainable design, low energy design, low carbon construction became the essential themes of the project from day one. The site and biodiversity for us was something that was very important. So our urban approach was about reorganizing the buildings so that we were giving more space back to this kind of interesting green, diverse land use, but also that had a kind of public, shared, communal potential use and connected well with the park to the south. The plan and form of the buildings, so everything we did in terms of planning and organization was about good, well-working spaces. So all offices and apartments have double orientation, and they all open out onto winter garden spaces. So these exterior internal spaces. So every single one, whether it's an office space, one bed apartment or a 3-bed apartment, have this privilege, and that increases their chances of being well used, well ventilated, naturally ventilated when possible, and it's good DNA, let's say, for these buildings in the city. The winter gardens are interesting for us. There was a hint from the master plan, and we embraced it and said the quality of life of inhabitants has to be improved by these spaces. So you get this protected semi-outdoor space. You enjoy it all year long. In the winter, it's part of your apartment in the kind of northern climate, and in the summertime, it opens out wide, and it gives you a tool to make your apartment more comfortable, more enjoyable. I'll come into that a little bit later. Then the question of low energy prefabricated exposed structures. So we embrace the idea of timber structures, hybrid timber and concrete structures, so we could reduce the amount of energy embodied in the buildings, but also because for us, it was an interesting approach to take that was focused on materials. So I want to speak a little bit about the housing building to start off with. It's the one on the right here. It sits between, so this orchard space, and sort of divides the orchard space from the main street where we have the step back second square in the master plan. It's got a series it's got arcades essentially on either side of it that are created by the decision to make winter garden spaces lining each facade. And then, well, what do those winter gardens and those arcades feel like, look like? This was an early sketch. We knew quite early that because of the decisions we've made, they were going, the arcade and the winter gardens were going to give the buildings their character. They're lined entirely, or the buildings lined up entirely on either side with these spaces. So organizationally, the building is quite simple and quite repetitive. We have a ground floor for commercial spaces and 7 floors above. Only the top floor changes to create gardens, and the rest of the floors are equal. And as you can see, larger apartments are organized in the center and smaller apartments on the edge in this repeated floor plan. 3 cores mean that every single apartment in the building is double oriented. And of course, every single apartment has a winter garden. Here you can see that standard plan with its 3 cores in the middle, service spaces, everything organized as rationally as possible. Coming up to the top floor, you have these step backs where the top floor apartments open up their roofs and create gardens, outdoor gardens that connect to the winter garden. Of course, the photovoltaic panels on the roof, the usual, and an underground parking. Here you can see an early model looking at the quite tight structure structural grid that we were looking at creating even from the early days. And this tight structural grid was about saying, we want to build a building in timber with structural timber where possible. And so we're going to have to start designing these structural arrangements straight from the start. So what you can see here is the final structural arrangement. In the body of the building, the slabs are made from solid timber. The cores and the vertical structure of the body is made from prefabricated concrete. In the winter garden structure, it's flipped, and the solid floor that you stand on is a prefabricated floor, exposed as well at the ceiling. And the vertical structure, which gives the character and the face to the building, is a solid timber column. So you can see here a section across the building where on one side you have the garden and on the other side the main street. And so many of these apartments have a front garden and a back garden in a way. Here we are inside the winter garden space. We can see how this structural approach starts to bear fruit in a way. You have exposed structure everywhere. So this double skin concrete facade, one skin is exposed on the outside as the final finishing material, sandblasted. And on the inside, the other skin is exposed for thermal comfort, a bit of coolness in this quite light building. The ceiling inside is a CLT, so it's a solid timber soffit. The slab is exposed. And inside the winter garden, the slab is a prefabricated concrete slab, which is organized so that it doesn't need a second finishing. It's simply exposed and sandblasted. And then on the left, you have the vertical solid timber columns that are holding up that concrete slab. And you also have the glazed screens. So the whole logic of this is about saying, we aim to use timber structures and hybrid structures, but the client, who are very open-minded and interested in architecture, excited by it, they're also commercial clients, and they only want it if it costs the same thing as it would have cost in a standard business as usual approach. So the whole challenge of the building is about using these materials, assembling them in a very economical, prefabricated way, so that the construction site is very quick and very smooth. Let's see how it goes. And in doing this, we get a kind of a payoff of generosity from doing things in quite a rigid, repetitive way. Here, the winter garden comes down to the ground where we need a concrete structure to deal with that and those extra spans inside the building. And on the ground floor, we protect the timber by lifting it up, and we have these longer, taller concrete posts. This is us in the orchard looking back at the building and seeing, I guess, the play of use and experience and people looking back down over the orchard. What's interesting, I guess, is the sort of contrast between something that's repetitive and quite ordered with the different use that people make of the winter garden, and it becomes a little bit kind of a front garden in a way. It's really two front gardens as opposed to a front and a back garden. Here on the side of the building, the winter gardens we don't need them on the side of the building. We undress that body, and it's exposed, and they're simple timber framed windows that give the plan light. Here we are looking at the arcade on the ground floor. For us, it's a really interesting sort of buffer space between the city and the commercial space and the residential spaces. Here, the residential lobby spaces, arrival points, they're really rooms that get a special place looking out onto that square. Quite simple spaces, but they importantly have a view to, and are seen from the main street. So now looking at the office space, and I'll try to explain it quickly because it shares a lot of the same characteristics as the residential building. In the office space, we have a long communal office building. So you have a series of different offices inside. And so on the ground floor, you have an arrival point, a series of commercial spaces, the arrival for bikes and everything that is connected to workspace. And we saw the opportunity of creating, architecturally, the opportunity of creating external space for an office building. But the challenge then is to find also a commercial logic to external space. I mean, we know that new office space or the space that businesses want today is a more varied kind of space than the standardized office space that was offered before. That's a kind of new normal. People want to have a different kind of space, varied space, diverse space. And we started to look at this winter garden on the office building as a potential opportunity for that. It's also, these are some early sketches and models. It's also, for us, you know, it gave this office building a clear direction towards the public spaces that we were designing, and it meant that we could find ways for it to be like a sibling with its partner, the residential building. We started to discover that actually using this external space as a kind of circulation zone meant that the office space, that the rented, insulated office space becomes quite pure, and the circulation that you would usually find in the office space comes to the outside of the building and becomes this shared social space, a kind of gallery that you walk up and down to the different spaces. It also gives a building which has kind of 20 different compartments, a shared experience, a shared identity. You arrive at one entrance point as an office user, you go up to your level 5 and you walk across the space, you run into somebody else. It's a simple idea, but it's one that makes the building actually a little bit special to use. And as you walk up and down the space to office number whatever, you have an experience of looking out over the orchard and connecting back to the neighborhood in a way. Here's just an office building is always a tool for being organized in different ways, and this is the same. These are some early models looking at how we might whether this model would work for our client and whether it made sense to them to have an office building that they would rent to people to have this circulation gallery. And so we're looking at on the left, you see, you know, the office space opens a generalized open area, opens onto the gallery, and there are cellular offices behind. Or you organize it differently and you have a general area that's through the plan, and you have, you know, rooms organized to the side. Everything is possible in this, and this is through these models we started to get excited about this as a commercial solution as well. Here we again hybrid concrete and timber structures, a ground floor in concrete, and the rest of the building working in both timber and concrete. It's a prefabricated system once again. The gallery itself is actually only prefabricated concrete, and that's because the gallery, which I've just come back to again, sitting beside standard office space, it's a bit taller, it's a bit freer, it's got no air conditioning or anything like that. It's a more durable space, and it needs to be because it's also an escape route from the point of view of the fire department. So here you have a view down that gallery, the orchard to the left, office space to the right. The bay in this case that we had to design and figure out is about 2 large fixed windows that let in as much light as possible through the winter garden into the office beyond, because of course that's the primary thing in an office building, light. And in the central part of the bay, you have a glass louver that opens and closes, and it's just used by the people in the office to regulate the spaces. They can leave it open all summer long, or they can close it all winter long. The office, the space works manually, let's say. It's a simple system. And then you have, because you need a fire separation between the different levels, the facade of the winter garden has this opaque band, horizontal band, and that's a nice height for a seat. And so the winter garden has a permanent piece of furniture that's owned by everyone in a way. That's just explaining in the winter months, it's closed and ventilation happens slowly and trickles through. And in the summer months, it's quite open and there's a breeze. It's quite an interesting space, this 65-meter long kind of gallery. From the outside, you can see that you got this communal garden. You've got the two buildings with their winter gardens looking at each other. You got the start of the hard square on the right, which is used by the commercial spaces in a very definite way. This building then has two very different characters. On one side, the winter garden, long horizontal space, and on the other side, the grid of the timber structure needs to be quite tight, and so it's made based on an office grid of 2.7 meters, where we have columns at every grid point. This means that each office potential small office space has a large picture window opening. Those picture windows have a fixed piece, and they have this is a very old model. This in terms of office windows, it's a big timber frame which has a fixed glazed piece, and it has a ventilation opening on one side, so you can open your window as you choose. What is maybe interesting then is how we decided to clad it, thinking of a ceramic deep green tile which has its own form to catch the light in an interesting way. On the winter garden side, it's clad in open timber cladding, which means that acoustically the space can be well treated. Here's that logic coming down to meet the ground floor, which is in concrete again. Those two logics meet on the side facade, which is an interesting moment where you have to find harmony between the different things that are going on, and compositionally at what happens to the picture window side and the winter garden side as they come together. The shared spaces are really important in this building. You arrive at every single office person arrives in this space, and they look out through it to the orchard. Same with the lobbies upstairs. Everyone arrives from their lift or from the staircase and move out into the gallery space. You can see here when the buildings come together that they're quite different, but they share something, and they share their siblings in a way. And here we are on the main street, arriving down, standing in front of the residential building on the left, and the office building on the right, where the external escape staircases bring people up into or let people escape and bring people up into the building. Here we are now looking back down the pedestrian axe towards the square. It's worth noting that this is a work in progress, and we're about to complete the tender documents. It's been a great collaboration with our client, Triple Living, and our local architects, Bureau Technique, and not to mention our consultants. We look forward to seeing how this progresses as it moves, very probably into construction next year. Thank you very much for the invitation.
At Brickworks Vande Moortel, we make high-quality bricks, slips and clay pavers in unique colors and sizes. To support architects around Europe and the UK, we created a brand new high-end brick lab, housing the latest in ceramic innovations. Built on more than 150 years of experience, we bring together tradition with the architecture of tomorrow. Every brick, slip and clay paver in our brick lab is part of a research and development program creating new knowledge and insights. Working together with architects, we can thus reach higher levels of sustainability, quality and circular solutions, combining them with the highest design standards of today. All this without losing our passion that we would love to share with you.